Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you to the Habibie Center Talking ASEAN seminar on revisiting the 43rd ASEAN Summit, the prospect of continuity between Indonesia and Laos ASEAN Chairmanship. My name is Herawati. I am a researcher of the ASEAN Studies Program at the Habibie Center, and I will be moderating today's discussion. Thank you so much for coming to the Habibie Center. And before we start our discussion today, I would like to remind you to put your phone on the silent mode. Thank you so much. And for more than 5 decades, ASEAN has played an important role in shaping Southeast Asian regionalism. Indonesian chairmanship this year is seen as a crucial in addressing the ongoing regional and extra-regional crisis comprehensively. It aims to implement the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific and establish clear indicators for regional initiative aimed at reducing developmental disparities within the region. The 43rd ASEAN Summit and its vision, ASEAN Matters, Epicenter of Growth, not only serve as milestone for Indonesia's leadership, but also as an opportunity to measure whether the group has successfully taken the lead in a rapidly evolving regional landscape. Despite disruptive geopolitical tension, Indonesia has made a significant impact during this series of summits by emphasizing human rights and the significance of ASEAN to its citizens through the ASEAN Concord 4. These seminars aims to provide insight into the key outcomes of the 43rd ASEAN Summit, to assess Indonesia's ASEAN chairmanship, and also to discuss its continuity prospect and also the upcoming ASEAN chairmanship next year. And to discuss this topic, I am very pleased to welcome our 3 distinguished speakers. The first one, His Excellency Derry Aman. He is the Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary as well as the Permanent Representative of the Republic of Indonesia to ASEAN. Ambassador Derry Aman had a substantial career as an Indonesian diplomat since 1995. He started his career at Directorate General of Multilateral Cooperation of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Indonesia. So he was also served as Minister or Deputy Chief of Mission at the Indonesian Embassy in Canberra. So that's the time when I met Bapak Ambassador Derry for the first time, when I did my internship, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I totally forgot about that.
Oh, it's okay. You have a lot on your plate, so yeah.
You're very familiar to me.
So yeah, I did internship in the Indonesian Embassy in Canberra. And Ambassador Derry led the Center for Partnership in the Partnership Facilitation and International Organization at the Ministry of Transportation from 2022 to 2021. His extensive experience spans international relations, cooperation, and negotiation at bilateral, regional, and global levels. He has participated in various ASEAN mechanisms, United Nations Global Conference, UNESCAPE, World Trade Organization activities, including the Doha Round and international trade matters. Additionally, he has been a member of the Indonesian National Committee for the ASEAN Chairmanship in 2011 and 2023. Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador. Welcome to the Habibie Center. Yeah, hopefully you will remember me after this event. Thank you. The second speaker, His Excellency Bovonethat Douangchak. He is the Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary, as well as the permanent representative of the Laos PDR to ASEAN. He pursued a Master of Public Policy with major in Economics and Public Policy at Korea Development Institute, School of Public Policy and Management in Seoul, Republic of Korea. Prior to his current role, he held the position of Deputy Director General of ASEAN Department at Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ambassador Bovonethat had an extensive diplomatic career, including serving as consular, charge d'affaires, Deputy Permanent Representative of the Laos PDR to the United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva. In his earlier career, he served as Director of International Economic Division within the Department of Economic Affairs at the MOVA. Welcome to the Habibie Center, Mr. Ambassador. And last but not least, we have Mr. Kornelius Purba. Mr. Kornelius Purba is a senior editor at Jakarta Post. After graduated from the Universitas Indonesia, he began his journalistic career in 1985 as a reporter for the Japanese newspaper Asahi Shimbun in Jakarta. Afterward, he joined the Jakarta Post in 1997 as a reporter and held the position of senior managing editor from 2010 to 2019. Throughout more than 38 years of his career as journalist, so it's like more than what my age now. So he's very has a lot of experience, and he has covered various issues such as politics, economy, and military in the national, regional, and global levels. Good afternoon, Mr. Cornelius Purba. Welcome to the Habibie Center. This seminar will be divided into two sessions. First is the presentation from our speakers. So we will give you 15 to 20 minutes to present. And then after all the presentation are delivered, we will move to the Q&A session. So the audience in this building can ask the question, and then I will pass the question to the speakers. And also, for our online participant, you all can ask question on or give comment on the YouTube, and then our team will take your question, and then I'll pass it to the speaker. So without further ado, I would like to invite our first speaker, Ambassador Derry Aman. He will be deliver the key takeaways from the 43rd ASEAN Summit from the lens of Southeast Asia and then extra-regional dynamics. So, Mr. Derry Aman, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ibu Herawati. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A very good afternoon to everyone. It's always a pleasure to be invited by the Habibie Center. I was here a couple of times back then when I was still young, although I am still young. But it's always a pleasure. And also this time to be together with my dear colleague, Mr. Incoming Chair of ASEAN, Ambassador Bo. And also, who doesn't know in Indonesia about Pak Kornelius Purba, always a respected journalist, as we have listened to his CV. I think when I was still in high school, he's already being a journalist. So it's a pleasure for me to be here once again, and also to see another colleague of ours, Ambassador Vicky Sigmund from Canada, the Canadian ambassador to ASEAN, and his colleague. And I see also a colleague from the mission of the Republic of Korea to ASEAN. So, and everyone else here, and also participants joining virtually. A very good afternoon once again to everyone. So I've been asked by the Habibie Center to share with all of you especially with regard to Indonesia's ASEAN Chairmanship, where we are all aware that we have just passed, Alhamdulillah, the 43rd ASEAN Summit and related summits. So it's one of the milestone of Indonesia's chairmanship this year. Although once again, please not to be confused that the Indonesian chairmanship will still be until the 31st of December 2023. So from now until 31st of December, I'm still the chair of the Committee of Permanent Representatives to ASEAN. And by 1st January 2024, my good colleague, Ambassador Bo, will take over, and rest assured of Indonesia's support to Laos Chairmanship next year. So, distinguished participants, I would like to start to give you with a background of Indonesia's chairmanship, what we aim to do, what we envision would be representing Indonesia's ASEAN chairmanship. First, we should know, I think everyone is well aware that the chairmanship theme, ASEAN Matters, Epicentrum of Growth. It, in a simple way, it represents three pillars or three clusters. The first is ASEAN Matters. The second is Epicentrum of Growth. And the third is the mainstreaming and implementation of the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, or the AOIP. And we should all also note that Indonesia's chairmanship is undertaken while the world, as we see together, experience together, facing global multidimensional challenges in geopolitical as well as geo-economic settings. I would say that everyone is well aware of the situation as well as the regional situation, which of course have impacts or affected how ASEAN, together with all the 10 ASEAN member states, as well as Indonesia as chair this year, try to navigate how ASEAN's chairmanship shall be undertaken, and most importantly, what benefits that ASEAN can take from the situation that we are seeing together, as well as how ASEAN can further contribute towards the region, towards the Indo-Pacific region, towards the global situation. And if we look into the chairmanship further, there are specific areas that we want to highlight in supporting the economic growth in the region, or in achieving the epicentrum of growth, which is strengthening food security, energy security, regional health architecture, as well as financial stability. And there is a special emphasis about developing the electric vehicle ecosystem. So these are some of the highlights in terms of the second pillar of epicentrum of growth that Indonesia's chairmanship would like to advance. And based on these highlights, we try to work together with our ASEAN colleagues as well as with our ASEAN partners on how we can try to reflect or achieve these highlights in our chairmanship. In terms of ASEAN matters, as you can see, ASEAN shall remain strategic, significant, and relevant to make sure that ASEAN matters. So the existence of ASEAN, does it really matter towards ASEAN itself, towards the region, and what kind of contribution through ASEAN that the global situation or the global development may receive from the existence of ASEAN. Remaining strategic, significant, and relevant, of course, it would entails internally towards ASEAN itself, towards the ASEAN community, towards ASEAN people, and also externally, as I've mentioned. How can ASEAN contribute or influence the development of the Indo-Pacific region, as well as to contribute towards the global situation and condition that we all experience? In essence, is ASEAN matters can be said as to be able to navigate geopolitical dynamics in the region. Since the third cluster or pillar is the mainstreaming and implementation of the AOIP, I'd like to take this opportunity to also share what is actually the meaning of the third pillar or cluster of Indonesia's ASEAN Chairmanship. So it's clear that we would like to prioritize the mainstreaming and the implementation of the AOIP, and this has been reflected in our discussions, in our debates, in our outcome documents, as well as Indonesia for the first time initiated a side event which we call as ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum to implement the AOIP, which basically is trying to identify practical cooperation, collaboration, projects that ASEAN within the Indo-Pacific region and together with our partners, dialogue partners, sectoral partners, development partners, we try to identify what kind of activities, what kind of projects has been ongoing, or what kind of projects or practical cooperation that we can work together with our partners in the near future within the Indo-Pacific region. So in essence, the AOIP is for having an Indo-Pacific region of development, inclusive, peaceful, stable, and prosperous. And there are 4 priority areas in the AOIP that we would like to invite our external partners to work with, such as on maritime cooperation, connectivity, sustainable development goals, and economic cooperation and other possible cooperation. So those are the 4 priority areas of the AOIP, which again, 10 ASEAN member states would like to work together with our partners, whether they are dialogue partners, whether they are sectoral partners, development partners of ASEAN, that the Indo-Pacific region shall be a region where cooperation and collaboration is being put forward. So we want to have those cooperation and collaboration. We want to foster the habit of dialogue so that ASEAN together with its partners will put the region, the Indo-Pacific region, towards, as I've mentioned, a region of development, a region which is inclusive, a region which is peaceful, stable, and prosperous. So let me go to the 42nd ASEAN Summit. The 42nd ASEAN Summit, as you are aware, was convened in Labuan Bajo in May 2023, and this is also one of the highlights of Indonesia's chairmanship. This is the first summit that we convened during our chairmanship, and most importantly, we convene it in a more unconventional location, which is Labuan Bajo, which is in terms of infrastructure support very challenging, but alhamdulillah we managed to convene this 43rd ASEAN Summit in Labuan Bajo, and the ASEAN leaders who attended this 42nd ASEAN Summit was offered with the landscape, the beauty, and the potential of Labuan Bajo. So during the 42nd ASEAN Summit, we had 11 outcome documents, and it represents again the ASEAN Chairmanship theme, whether it's food security, energy security, health, financial stability, development of electric vehicle system, and other issues which ASEAN leaders saw it important to have a commitment within ASEAN on how to develop or to address those challenging issues. If I may mention some of the highlights of the outcome documents about ASEAN itself, how ASEAN sees themselves towards 2025. Even during Indonesia's chairmanship, it goes beyond post-2025. We already have been looking at the vision of ASEAN in 2045, which is, of course, the 100th anniversary of the Indonesian independence. So others, such as trafficking in persons, with the focus on the misuse or the abuse of technology, scams, those kind of crimes that have been undertaken by these organized crimes that affected trafficking in persons. And of course, the development of regional electric vehicle ecosystem. And then on financial stability, we promoted the regional payment connectivity, promoting local currency transaction. And then there are issues such as migrant workers, as well as migrant fishers, the protection of migrant fishers, declaration on One Health initiative, and we also established the ASEAN Villages Network. So, of course, as you may be aware, in 2023, during Indonesia's chairmanship, it was decided that Timor-Leste is in principle admitted as a new member of ASEAN, and before its full membership, Timor-Leste is an observer of ASEAN, where with the status of observer, Timor-Leste can attend all ASEAN meetings as an observer. So this is, of course, another milestone where in the near future we can expect that ASEAN will be 11 instead of 10. So those are the main highlights for the 42nd ASEAN Summit, which was convened in Labuan Bajo in May. And may I go further to the 43rd ASEAN Summit and related summits, which was convened in Jakarta early September. So still this month, a couple of weeks ago. And I believe myself, Ambassador Bo, Ambassador Fiki, we're still looking very exhausted due to the summits. Because it was, for me, especially as chair, was very exhaustive, tiring, not much sleepless in Jakarta instead of Seattle. So, but again, Alhamdulillah, we passed through the 43rd ASEAN Summit and related summits, which I believe people outside ASEAN sees it as a success, if I may say, for being in the loop of this 43rd ASEAN Summit and related summits. Of course, I will be very subjective to say if it's successful or not, but I let all audience and whoever are interested in ASEAN see whether the 43rd ASEAN Summit and related summits is indeed a success in terms on what it has represented, in terms in what they have achieved, in terms in what ASEAN contribute towards the region and towards the global world. So in this 43rd ASEAN Summit and related summits, so probably I have to also explain a little bit. Related summits is what we meant by the ASEAN Plus 3, ASEAN Plus 1, the East Asia Summit. So those are other summits outside the ASEAN 10 Summit. So that is why we call it the 43rd ASEAN Summit and related summits. The related summits is the summits between ASEAN and its partners. There were 90 outcome documents. So for those who are not that aware of how these outcome documents have been produced, almost, not all, almost all of them are being negotiated. So it takes time, it takes process to have these outcome documents. Some of them, of course, are for notation. Some of them for adoption. The negotiated one, of course, are being adopted. So if you see the 43rd ASEAN Summit and related summits, the process, we could say it began after the 42nd Summit. So after May, we already look into this 43rd ASEAN Summit. What do we want? What do we want to achieve? And we work on that. A lot of processes where myself and Ambassador Bo, most of the time, we're always in the ASEAN Secretariat, right? Yeah, almost every day we're there, meeting, negotiating. So it is indeed tiring, but in the end, what we have achieved is something that, for us who has been directly involved, is very satisfying. And again, 90 outcome documents attended by 22 countries, including the Prime Minister of Canada, and of course the Prime Minister of the Republic of Korea, and 9 international organizations, including the Secretary General of the United Nations. There was also from the Pacific Island Forum, from the Indian Ocean Rim Association, and other organizations such as World Bank and the IMF. So, if I may say, the significant progress is not only in the context of ASEAN community building. So there is a spearhead agenda of ASEAN community building, but also in upholding ASEAN centrality, the centrality of ASEAN, and the mainstreaming of ASEAN's norms and values, as well as strengthening and enhancing ASEAN's external relations with our partners. So the 90 outcome documents, I'm not going to go one by one, but I believe this presentation will be shared to everyone, right? Yeah, of course. Yeah, as long as they don't change it. Yeah, please, you may share it to everyone. But I just would like to point out the number one, the East Asia Summit Leader Statement on Maintaining and Promoting the Region as an Epicentrum of Growth. This is a negotiated outcome document with, together with ASEAN 10 and 8 of our non-ASEAN participating countries of the EAS. And of course, this is the, if I may say, one of the hardest outcome that we have achieved, because we negotiated among 18 ASEAN and 8 countries, and the issues, although it highlights the importance of maintaining and promoting our region as an epicentrum of growth, but we also tried to include certain specific issues which are quite sensitive for the region, for a number of countries. But in the end, we managed to arrive to a consensus where, of course, not everyone is happy, but the spirit, the important thing for ASEAN is the spirit of our partners to accept a calibrated consensus, which the important thing is to having the EIS and outcome document, since we did not have an outcome document within the East Asia Summit since 2021. So this is another highlight I would like to share to everyone, that this year the EIS managed to come up with an outcome document with the focus of making the region as an epicentrum of growth. So let me go to the key takeaways. Okay, the East Asia Summit first. As I've mentioned, the East Asia Summit succeeded in having an outcome document this year. And just to provide some information, that the areas of cooperation of the East Asia Summit, we also just agreed in July at the ministerial level that we have a new plan of action for the East Asia Summit 2024-2028, which consists of these areas of cooperation. Previously, it was 6, if I'm not mistaken. Now it has added another 9, if I'm not mistaken. And some of the specific issues that have been discussed in the East Asia Summit, for example, the Korean Peninsula issue, South China Sea, the Ukraine situation, non-proliferation issues, as well as the development in Myanmar. So the East Asia Summit, again, 10 ASEAN member states together with our 8 partners, together collectively, we call it as the East Asia Summit, with the areas of cooperation as you can see on the screen. Next is the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum that I have mentioned earlier. This is the first time that Indonesia convened this ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum. It's part of the implementation of the AOIP. It was a major side event of the summit that Indonesia managed to convene, attended by around 2,500 participants from governments, private sector, businesses, youth, the public in general. There were 96 prominent speakers, and 16 companies, major companies, participated in this forum. And the result is the identification of 93 cooperation projects between ASEAN and our partners, whether it's G2G or G government and business, private sector, the public in general. There were 93 cooperation projects under the AOIP, of course, that was identified with a value of 38.2 billion US dollar. Billion is what in Indonesia? Miliar, okay. Billion, and these are, of course, projects that have been implemented as well as ongoing, the 93 cooperation projects. We have identified that. And we also have identified potential projects in the near future, which is feasible for ASEAN together with its partners to work together with. 73 potential projects with the value of 17.8 billion US dollar. So this is the main result of the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum, where we actually manage to identify practical cooperation and projects with the value or the benefit, if I may say, for ASEAN and its partners in cooperating and collaborating. Now the key takeaways. I have identified 4 key takeaways. First, in terms of the ASEAN community building. This is, of course, an ongoing agenda in ASEAN. since 2015, the establishment of the ASEAN community. The ASEAN community building will always progress, will always be undertaken. And in the end, what we want to achieve by this ASEAN community building is resilience, inclusiveness, peaceful, stable, integrated, rules-based, people-centered, people-oriented, of peace, stability, and prosperity of our region. So this is the vision of having this ASEAN community. And then the second is reasserting ASEAN centrality in the region through numerous ASEAN-led mechanisms. ASEAN-led mechanisms is ASEAN Plus One, ASEAN Plus 3, the EIS, the ARF, ADMM Plus. So those are the ASEAN-led mechanisms. I didn't mention all of them. It's just some of them, just for all of us to get the picture. ASEAN centrality, in essence, is emphasizing ASEAN's position in the driver's seat on our regional matters. Within the Indo-Pacific, within the ASEAN region, ASEAN should be at the center of it. The third,
I'm sorry, Ambassador Derry Aman. You still have 3 minutes to
Okay.
finish your presentation. Thank you.
so the third and the fourth is underscoring ASEAN's relevance, role, and contribution as a norm and value setter. And then the last is strengthening our relationships with our external partners. So as a conclusion, we have set out ASEAN's long-term vision through the ASEAN Concord 4 and the ASEAN Vision 2045, and then also making ASEAN matters more resilient to the challenges, making Southeast Asia or ASEAN as an epicentrum of growth, and making Indo-Pacific as a region of peace through an inclusive, concrete, cooperative approach. And the last, the TAC. It's an ongoing treaty which increasing number of countries acceded to this TAC. And the last, of course, by 1st January 2024, Laos PDR will assume its chairmanship of ASEAN, and as I've mentioned earlier, rest assured of Indonesia's full support. And if I may share before Ambassador Bo go into its details, that the theme that our colleagues from Laos PDR has taken up is enhancing connectivity and resilience. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your kind attention. And Ibu Herawati, again, thank you very much for the time and opportunity. I give the floor back to you.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you
you
very
so
much.
much. Thank you so much for your insightful presentation. So, yeah, I've taken some notes from your presentation. And then as ASEAN Team ASEAN Matters pillar, Indonesia aim to maintain ASEAN strategic value, significance, and relevance. And then from the ASEAN Matters, it means that ASEAN is able to navigate the regional development. And during Indonesia's chairmanship, Indonesia held 2 summits. The 42nd ASEAN Summit was convened in May 2023, and the 43rd ASEAN Summit was convened in September 23 in Jakarta, which produced 90 outcome documents, which were thoroughly negotiated. And also, aside from that, there were some discussion with dialogue partners, and there were 9 dialogues with 9 international organizations. And in conclusion, you believe that Indonesia's chairmanship succeeded in setting out a long-term regional vision, and also from the dialogues, there are some commitment from the country to cooperate in some project in ASEAN. I think what you've discussed in the presentation will shift our discussion smoothly to Bapak Kornelius Purba. So Bapak Kornelius Purba will deliver. Sorry. Okay. So I'd like to invite our second speaker, Mr. Kornelius Purba. He will deliver a presentation on the assessment on Indonesia's ASEAN Chairmanship and its vision towards making ASEAN matters epicenter of growth. And maybe you also can discuss a little bit of the continuity of Indonesia chairmanship toward the Laos Chairmanship next year. Mr. Cornelius Purba, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, actually I saw the pictures of President Habibie. I cover him from minister, vice president, and president. So I often smile. He was the only minister who could say, President Suharto already agree with me before meeting with the president. President Suharto already agreed with this project. Habibie said before meeting the President Suharto. So I do respect him, and his love with his wife is a legend. I wrote about the love story of the couples. I must clarify, moderator Ibu Hera, I could not finish my study at UI. I was dropped out. And I was proud of it because my son say, maybe you follow Bill Gates. Okay. The moderator concluded that I cover anything under the sun. So actually, I cover mostly foreign affairs from 1985, and then cabinet. I cover 4 presidents on daily basis. So you can imagine I have little appetite to NGOs because I'm pro the dictatorship. Okay, my presentation here, I just want to say here what the achievement of ASEAN. But before talking further, I want to mention first about Timor-Leste. It's very unfortunate that Prime Minister Sanana Gusmao damaged the opportunity of Timor-Leste to join ASEAN. I'm sorry to say it's very irresponsible. He say, we will not join ASEAN unless ASEAN could settle what happens in Myanmar. Come on, no one can overcome what's going on in Myanmar now. So I think it's damaging for Timor-Leste. But again, this is a journalistic point of view. Maybe Ambassador Bo, Ambassador Derry will get mad with me if I say something not so pleasant for them. Now we talk about RCEP, Regional Comprehensive. I think this is the largest and most important achievement for ASEAN. First, RCEP, we call it RCEP. I call it RCEP, is binding. The most important is binding. Has been ratified by all members. 9 ASEAN members. Myanmar has not, after the coup, the military coup, the 14 or 15 members ratify. Is binding. This is the largest FTA. With China and Japan are inside. So this is very important for Indonesia, for other ASEAN members, this economic achievement. For journalists who are very cynical, ASEAN is very good in producing documents. But this one is very worthy. And next. Indonesia ratified RCEP in August 2022. And the Philippines among the latest. At my age, I don't know how to use this. Okay. What's the benefits of RCEP? Very clear. For Indonesia, there's also ASEAN, intra-ASEAN trade, right? But with this, ASEAN will be very helpful to enter world market. See, eliminate 90% of traded goods and standardize many customs. Okay, and also Indonesian companies will benefit from RCEP through lower tariff rates for their export. This is from the Jakarta Post, our discussion. Apart from RCEP, especially Japan and Australia were very eager to establish the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. The intention is very clear, to contain China. But at that time, during the presidency of Barack Obama, but Donald Trump vetoed it as soon as he was in power in 2017. Japan and Australia still tried to revive, and they made it become CPTPP. And what is funny, China applies for membership. And just very recently, I think the United Kingdom, Britain applied for membership of CPTPP. But practically, this already dead, practically. And then President Joe Biden tried to lure ASEAN, and now he proposed the so-called Indo-Pacific Economic Partnership. And he will meet with ASEAN leaders during APEC Summit in LA in November. But this is very weak because without congressional approval. This is a very weak. And the members are US, Australia, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, Fiji, and India. Indonesia has not applied yet, but in my view, Indonesia will lose nothing when we become the member. Although for me, this is non-binding. Myanmar. Actually, after our success to host the G20, there is euphoria among Indonesian officials, government, that Indonesia would be able to overcome crisis in Myanmar. At least very significant progress. But you can see no progress at all. Whatever we say, we met 200 to 400 documents, but it's not only the mistake of Indonesia. Look, Myanmar, General Aung Min Hlaing signed the 5-point consensus during the ASEAN Emergency Summit in April 24, 2021, just 3 months after he toppled the democratically elected government of Aung San Suu Kyi. But then the Myanmar junta did not want to do anything. Why? First, I'm sorry, Ambassador Bo. Actually, ASEAN divided into, I can say, into two on Myanmar. In one side, the Mekong River countries, I wrote in Jakarta Post, Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. Especially when Thailand Prime Minister was still the General Prayut Chan-o-cha, he openly said it is the internal affairs of Myanmar. That's why the Prayut refused to come, right? And anyway, Prayut was very angry with me when we criticized Thailand did not deserve to chair ASEAN. And he said, who is Kornelius Purba? He cannot say anything on behalf of Indonesia. You can check it in Google. Until I still hesitate to go to Thailand. See, to end the violence in the country, hold dialogue, appointment of special envoy. President Jokowi initially very optimistic. He will send an army general in an interview with Reuters. But there is no follow-up at all. and allow humanitarian assistance by ASEAN. I think there is a progress about this. The military refused to carry out commitment. Let's say, I want to say something about Aung San Suu Kyi. In December 2019, Aung San Suu Kyi appeared at the International Court of Justice, GCI, to defend the military. If you read the speech, as if military is innocent, as if international community misunderstand about Myanmar. You can check the Google the full speech and in The Hague. Basically, there was no genocidal crimes against the Rohingya, the Muslim Rohingyas. But Aung San Suu Kyi also has her own problem. Until she was toppled in 2021, she refused to come to Indonesia for introductory visit. It is traditional mandatory for new leader to visit all capitals because she believes, suspected, Indonesia is very pro-Rohingya. The same, her sentiments same to Kuala Lumpur. And then the National Unity Government of Myanmar is too demanding to ASEAN. As if, do this, do that, do that. And I wrote a column, who do you think you are? For Indonesia, NUG is not the only representative of Aung San Suu Kyi. Only one of. Because there's so many conflicts there, regional conflict. There are also rebellions over there. What NUG should do is to approach ASEAN more active. But again, I'm a journalist. My description is just demand too much. Who do you think you are? And as already said, ASEAN today, the Mekong rivers also in another side, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, the Philippines. Brunei, I don't take it into account with absolute monarchy. It has no position. Why does military deny its commitment? It believes many ASEAN members are pro-junta. Myanmar had a strong tradition of total isolation for decades. You see the history. More than 50 years, they totally closed their doors. They don't care with poverty, they don't care with hunger. So the threat does not work. Sanction does not work. China and also Russia, to a certain extent, will be pro-military. Although actually, with or without Aung San Suu Kyi, China interest in Myanmar totally protected. And opposition groups are divided. So, is it a failure for Indonesia on Myanmar? No. The biggest achievement is, I think, to make sure that in the gender declaration, it mentions that the Philippines will host the ASEAN Summit in 2026. It means it is a temporary exclusion of military junta from all ASEAN activities, because it was planned, Myanmar scheduled to host Myanmar at the summit in 2026, but it was not for the first time. Myanmar was not allowed to host a summit. I think in 2006, also because the military and because the protest of European Union and Western countries. ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific. This concept is absurd, not clear. And I think the unclear concept is done intentionally. It is intentionally. Look, ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific. Our priority are areas, tadi Ambassador Derry, include maritime. But what is the meaning of maritime? ASEAN, without saying, it's maritime in South China Sea. Of course, you're fishing, whatever, but this more on security. Connectivity, economic cooperation, SGS, and financial. Okay. It geopolitically covers all nations and islands surrounding the Indian and Pacific Oceans, encompassing mainland Africa and Asian countries that border these oceans, such as India, South Africa, and the US. But actually, in the ASEAN mind, ROE, ASEAN outlook is especially on South China Sea. I don't think ASEAN cares so much about African waters. But it's not mentioned intentionally. Okay? There is no single concept on definition of Indo-Pacific. It is good. All countries say we stick to ASEAN as in the driving seat. But who is the owner of the car? You are driving, but who is the owner of the car? And all agree ASEAN will play a pivotal role. All agree. But there is, if you check Japan version of Indo-Pacific, Australian version, US, strangely, European countries also interested with Indo-Pacific. Nothing, maybe France say we have small islands in the Pacific. But in my view, there will be no one definition. For ASEAN, let people think about themselves. As long as American forces there, Australian, Japan, and other major powers present in South China Sea, it's been more than enough to counterbalance China. AUKUS. This is a trilateral security pact between Australia, United Kingdom, and the US. Established on September 15, 2023, Australia will get nuclear-powered submarines. Officially, Indonesia and ASEAN protest. But if you ask them personally, they agree with AUKUS to a certain extent. Because it means the rising presence of other military presence in the South China Sea. But of course, you ask Ibu Ratno will say, no. AUKUS at the time, Ibu Ratno was a bit offended because Australia informed about AUKUS just the very last minute before the meeting in Washington. Quad. This is also meant actually to contain China. AUKUS contain China, Quad contain China. The Quadrilateral Security Dialogue is a loose strategic cooperation between the US, Australia, India, and Japan. The leaders held their first summit in Tokyo in May 2022. If you see ASEAN leaders, especially Indonesia, also will say regret, not condemn, will regret. But they say it's okay as long as you don't ask me anything. I think I'm just talking 2 minutes already. Okay. Okay. From the ASEAN Secretary to ASEAN, it is a big progress. ASEAN Secretary to ASEAN headquarters. It means much bigger organization. It means more recruitment of professionals. I think the status of Secretary General should be upgraded. And of course, the ASEAN Charter needs revision. It'll be complicated, but it should be revised in accordance with the upgrading of the status. Jakarta is the capital city of ASEAN, and ASEAN may follow, we don't know when, the principle of African Union. You see, African Union can deploy military, right? Military intervention. One day, I don't know, we don't know when, but African Union is kind of ideal one day. But you may laugh at ASEAN, but remember, ASEAN Regional Forum has been one of the world's largest security forum at ministerial level. And also the yearly ASEAN Summit with developed partners has become more powerful and also become one of the most important global forums. Journalists usually cynical about ASEAN, but maybe because I covered too long, then I fall in love like Stockholm syndrome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mr. Cornelius Purba, for your very, very. Yes. What?
How about Laos host? Laos, I believe, will stick to ASEAN as the main driving force. It is almost impossible for a chair to make their own agenda, which is very, very different from the others, because all based on consensus. And the suspicion, some suspicion, that Laos will be generous to China is very baseless. And decision to suspend Myanmar military regime indefinitely will remain intact, even when we host a summit in Laos next year. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Cornelius Purba. Yeah, so you began your remark by expressing your regret over Timor-Leste Prime Minister statement on their hesitation to join ASEAN over the human rights issue. But you also noted that one of the most important outcomes is the entry into force, the RCEP, which had already been ratified by 9 member states, and it has various important dialogue partners such as China and Japan. And then you also mentioned that in terms of Myanmar, you saw that no progress had been made, and then you also problematized the clarity of the AOIP, which you deem to be conceptually unclear. And also, you also touch upon the Laos Chairmanship, and then you believe that Laos will stick to maintaining ASEAN position as the main driving force in the region. So thank you so much for your presentation. And then before we move on to the next speaker, I would like to remind the audience from YouTube that you can give comment or question in the chat box, but please mention your name and also your affiliation, and then we will pass the question to our speakers. Thank you. Okay, last but not least, I would like to call on Ambassador Bovonethat. He will deliver a presentation on the outlook on the upcoming ASEAN Chairmanship and the continuity of Indonesia Chairmanship in ASEAN. Given the geopolitical situation, such as the rivalry between US and China, and then the dispute on South China Sea and Taiwan Strait, as well as ongoing Myanmar crisis, how will Laos approach, and then what will be the highlight of the Laos Chairmanship next year? What is the challenge and opportunity? So for Ambassador Bovonethat, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Hirawati, our moderator, for giving me the floor. My thanks also go to the Habibie Center for the invitation, extended to me and my colleague from the Permanent Mission of Laos to ASEAN. Good afternoon, distinguished participants from the floor, as well as the participants from the online, virtually. I acknowledge Her Excellency Vicky Singmin, Ambassador of Canada to ASEAN, and her team. So one more time, dear participant, I did not prepare PowerPoint. I'm sorry about that. My comment will be based on my note, but we will be brief. Don't worry about that, because I heard that Ambassador already take some time. It's good. Yeah, not too much. It's good for me. So no need to talk much. So at the outset, I would like to take this opportunity to commend and appreciation to the government and the people of Indonesia, as well as Ambassador Derry and his team, Indonesian mission to ASEAN, for the conclusion, very successful for the 43rd ASEAN Summit, as well as the related summit. With the theme that Ambassador Derry also mentioned about the ASEAN matters, epicentrum of growth. Ambassador Derry already explained in detail about that. So as we are aware that why our regional and international the landscape is experiencing geopolitical and geo-economic uncertainty, Indonesia has played a very significant role in strengthening ASEAN unity and ASEAN centrality, advancing economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, addressing climate change, and promoting sustainable development and enhancing social and cultural cooperation. By the way, we, ASEAN Member States, have reaffirmed our commitment to further strengthen our ASEAN community, its unity and centrality, ensuring the full and effective implementation of the ASEAN Community Vision 2025 and working toward the ASEAN Community Vision 2045. And its attendant document, as Ambassador Derry said, is around 9 outcome document, 90 outcome document, in order to be a resilient, innovative, dynamic, people-centered, people-oriented, that is able to anticipate opportunity and address emerging challenges. We, ASEAN, also reaffirm our shared commitment to maintaining and promoting peace, security, stability, and prosperity in the regions. The Laos PDR is honored to assume the ASEAN Chairmanship for 2024. It is the third time for Laos to assume ASEAN Chairmanship, the first time in 2004, the second time in 2016. The third time will be next year. Laos will continue to build upon the very good momentum and achievement under the Indonesian Chairmanship, as well as from the previous ASEAN Chairmanship over the past years. We will focus further the consolidating ASEAN Community Vision 2025 and working toward to the ASEAN Community Vision 2045. Among others, by enhancing connectivity and resilience. This says these opportunity and addressing challenges in the changing geopolitical and geo-economic landscape. So for the detail of the key priority and deliverable, my colleague at the Capitol is still working, and we will conclude very soon, and we will share with you later. But by the way, please allow me to share some key area of cooperation that we plan for the next years. To achieve a more connected and resilient ASEAN, we will continue encouraging collective effort in the following, among others. Firstly, enhancing ASEAN cooperation, ASEAN external relations, and strengthening ASEAN unity and centralities in the evolving regional architecture for regional peace, stability, and development. Secondly, enhancing connectivity, integrating and connecting economies, reframing strategy for narrowing the development gap, promoting sustainable and inclusive economic growth, and advancing digital transformation in the region. And thirdly, promoting people-to-people exchange, cooperation for climate resilience, empowerment women, and health development. That's the key cooperation area that Laos Chairmanship will conduct in the next year. By the way, the Laos will try our best to serve ASEAN Chairmanship for next year, 2024. We stand ready to work closely with our ASEAN Member States and our dialogue partners and other external parties to ensure the continued strengthening of ASEAN community and the success of Laos PDR ASEAN Chairmanship under the theme ASEAN Enhancing Connectivity and Resilience. For the some area of cooperation under the social and cultural pillar, I would like to share with you the cover 4 key areas. One is the culture and art, promoting the role ASEAN culture and art for inclusion and sustainability. Second, promoting environmental cooperation, climate change, resilience. Third, women and children, promoting the role of women and children toward the transformation and behavior in ASEAN. And the fourth is health, transforming ASEAN health development resilience in the new context. For the economic pillar community, we also discussed that we will cover 3 strategic thrusts. For the first strategic thrust is the integrating and connecting economy. For the second strategic thrust is the forging an inclusive and sustainable. And for the last one, strategic thrust 3 is transforming for the future. That concludes my comment. If you have anything more to ask me, please feel free to ask. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador, for your presentation. So I have noted that you begin your remark by congratulating Indonesia's success in its chairmanship and the 43rd ASEAN Summit, and also next year will be Laos' third time to assume the ASEAN chairmanship, and then it will build upon Indonesia's 23 chairmanship and its past chairmanship. So there will be continuity between Indonesia and Laos. And then Laos will continue to enhance the ASEAN cooperation, ASEAN external relation, and ensuring ASEAN centrality. Thank you so much for all of the speakers for a very insightful presentation. And I believe now we will move on to the next session, the Q&A. So I will give opportunities for the participant in this room to ask question or give comment, and you can raise your hand and our team will help you with the microphone. So is there any question? Yeah, one question, two. Okay. Yeah. Can you please give the microphone to that gentleman over there? And if you please mention your name and your affiliation, that will be very appreciated. Yeah, please. Yeah, you can set up. Yeah.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Muhammad Alfian Sofakhiri. I'm a student from Queen Sharif Hidayatullah Jakarta of International Relations bachelor degree. I want to ask a question for the Mr. Bovonethat about the ascension process of Timor-Leste into ASEAN. Aside from what Mr. Purba said about the comment from Sanana Gusmao about Myanmar ending the conflict there or whatever about that before taking Timor-Leste into becoming a member of ASEAN. Is there or will there any plan from the Laos presidency next year to fast track the membership accession process for Timor-Leste? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your question. Next question. So I will collect 2 or 3 questions and then I will pass it to our speakers. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Laila Miriam Faiza. I am a final year student, international relations student from Universitas Al-Azhar Indonesia. My question is for Mr. Kornelius Purba. I would like to know why you think that we have nothing to lose in the Indo-Pacific economic framework, because wouldn't we lose the benefits of the IPEF itself? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your question. Is there any more question? Yeah, my friend from the Habibie Center, please.
Yeah, my name is Lutfi from the Habibie Center. I'm a researcher. I'm really interested to what Kornelius Purba has said about ASEAN might be looking like African Union. What made you refer to African Union? I mean, yes, you've said that the military intervene could happen, but what's more that make you think ASEAN is maybe going to that direction? Is it because the other characteristic that ASEAN might have similar, might have that similar to ASEAN, African Union. Apart from that, I'm just curious about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luffy, for the question. Okay, I will collect the three questions, and then the question the first question was for Ambassador Douangchak. In terms of Timor-Leste accession, notwithstanding the Sanana Gusmao comment, is there any plan for Laos to fast-track Timor-Leste accession? Maybe if also Ambassador Derry want to add something, please, for the answer. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Let me start first. Start from the first question from student from the international relation. Thank you very much. Yes, Timor-Leste has applied to be the ASEAN member since 2011, and then during the Cambodia Chairmanship in the Cambodia, ASEAN has, in principle, to accept Timor-Leste as an observer. So during the Indonesian Chairmanship this year, Timor-Leste had attended all the ASEAN meeting as observer, start from the ASEAN Summit, top level, to the working group. So Timor-Leste can get more experience how to prepare himself to be the full ASEAN membership in the near future. In fact, ASEAN, we have a roadmap for the Timor-Leste to become the full membership of ASEAN in the near future. I could not put the exact year when Timor-Leste will become the full member of ASEAN based on our ASEAN principle is ASEAN consensus. But by the way, we have roadmap already. I think it's very soon. For the Laos PTR, as I mentioned, that Laos will follow up the good momentum of and achievement of the Indonesian Chairmanship as well as the previous ASEAN Member State Chairmanship over the past year. So that I think that this can respond to your question, and then my dear colleague, Mr. Chair, Ambassador Derry, we will share some more on that preparation for the Timor-Leste to be the full membership of ASEAN. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Derry, do you want to add something?
Yes, thank you very much. In addition to what Ambassador Bo has responded, I would say that the most important aspect to understand with regard to Timor-Leste's process for a full membership is that ASEAN has already agreed on a roadmap. The roadmap should be the guideline, the guidance for Timor-Leste, especially for Timor-Leste, as well as for ASEAN, to decide when will be the time that is the right time that we in ASEAN see that Timor-Leste has fulfilled this roadmap. So in terms of the timing, as Ambassador Bo has mentioned, it will be open-ended. It will depend largely on Timor-Leste, on how fast, how quick, how comprehensive Timor-Leste will be able to fulfill this roadmap. So it's up to them. ASEAN will, of course, in a position, and of course the chair next year, as the chair this year, we have assisted and supported Timor-Leste in trying to fulfill this process of roadmap. So it's not a matter of who or which chair will accelerate this process. It's up to Timor-Leste whether they can accelerate themselves to fulfill this roadmap, because the roadmap is a guidance. Once it is fulfilled, then we can say that it is time, it is ready for Timor-Leste to be a full member. So that is the notion that I think everyone should understand and take into consideration whenever we talk about Timor-Leste's membership. The most important aspect also that I would like to share and emphasize is that since January this year, Timor-Leste has been attending and participating in ASEAN meetings for them to familiarize themselves and also for them to help themselves in fulfilling this roadmap. Yeah, there are a lot of things in the roadmap that they have to fulfill. And it takes a whole government activity in Timor-Leste to try to fulfill it, because it's not about only the foreign affairs. It's about all government institutions. It's about the people, on how they can bring Timor-Leste as a whole to be an ASEAN member with the guidance of this roadmap. So that would be my additional information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for the information, Ambassador Derry. And I will move on to the two questions. I believe they were for Mr. Kornelius Purba. So the first question is from Laila. The question is, why do you think that we have nothing to lose by joining IPEF? And also the second question was from Lutfi. So with regards to comparison to the African Union, what are the reasons for that comparison? Yeah, thank you.
This is journalistic answers, so non-binding. So IPEF actually, when Donald Trump decided that US drop out from the TPP, because first Donald Trump did not like anything about Barack Obama, and also domestic sentiment in US at the time. Why should we give more opportunity for others, especially Japan, to export more to us? So that is the sentiment, public sentiment. So at the time, Japan, because for Japan, I have a Japanese friend who is the Sherpa for this TPP. Actually, he was promised to get much higher position, because if failure, he could only get ambassador in some countries in Europe. The TPP for Japan and Australia, they want to revive TPP with the expectation when Donald Trump was no longer in power, his successor, especially if it come from the Democratic Party, will resume membership. So they established the CPTPP, CPTPP. But when Joe Biden came to power in 2021, then he realized anti-TPP is still very strong and for domestic politics. So as compensation, he offered IPEF. It does not need congressional approval. It means, I can say this, non-binding. So I say, of course the purpose all to contain China. But TPP, according to Japan, is the most sophisticated trade agreement in the world. At the time, Indonesia reluctant to join TPP. I think joined Vietnam, and finally Brunei also joined TPP. But IPEF, you lose nothing. Who knows, they can offer us a more concession on textile, footwears. When it doesn't work, it's okay. But for sure, it's non-binding. So we cannot expect much from the IPEF. In November, Joe Biden will host APEC in San Francisco. APEC is Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. Indonesia hosted that in 1994 and maybe 2013. But it is non-binding. With all respect, it's non-binding. So IPEF, I say, just take it. Who knows? It's beneficial, but don't expect much. Amid the domestic sentiment, very strong domestic protectionist in America. Is it okay? If you're not satisfied, I'm just journalist. And I must give special attention to the photographer. Otherwise, he won't sell me the photo to us. The African Union, look, 20 to about 15 years ago, ASEAN members thinks the ideal is to be EU, European Union. This ideal. It should be the final destination. But later we see how the weakness of European Union now. Many criticism against ASEAN because the non-interference principle. That's the military junta say, non-interference principle. But there is now development in ASEAN. Look, your neighbors has 3 kids. The wife beat them, wife and children every night and scream every night. You still say non-interference? That's now the spirit in ASEAN. There is now a loose understanding of non-interference. That's what happens in Myanmar when the natural disaster happens. And then Myanmar junta allow humanitarian assistance to Myanmar. Initially, they refused. Then, now, why African Union? I'm not expert on Africa. I just visit South Africa and Namibia under Nelson Mandela. But they're binding. I think now there is I forgot the country, which military coup, and then French President Macron withdrew ambassador and the military. Sorry? Oh, Niger, okay. But then African Union can send peacekeeping troops. That's according to their charter. It means non-interference. That's why I say one day we will follow African Union, but we don't know when. We don't know when. And African Union now is invited as a member of G20. So I think in terms of military intervention, it's intervention, right? It's allowed. We could not imagine it will happen in ASEAN. But at least you are now loosening the definition of what is non-interference. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cornelius Purba. Is there any question from the floor? We still have 3 questions. Oh, okay. Maybe I should start from the behind, please. Yeah.
Good afternoon, speakers and moderator. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Marina. I am a researcher at the Habibie Center. My question goes to all speakers. My first question is, how was the discussion about the release of new Chinese map during the 43rd ASEAN Summit? And then the second one, as you know that some ASEAN countries like Malaysia, Vietnam, and the Philippines have rejected the map. But what is the ASEAN stance as a regional organization to respond on that? Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Marina. And then the second question? Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you, moderator. And thank you also for all the speakers for delivering such insightful remarks. My name is Mabden. I'm also a researcher at the Habibie Center. My questions is also directed to all of the speakers, and especially maybe to Derry, Aman, and Ambassador Douangchak. First, I was wondering, given that Mr. Derry Aman has mentioned about the deliverables and key outcomes of this year's chairmanship of Indonesia, I understand that if we look through publications in various media, as well as discussions held by various think tanks, I can vividly remember that initially there were expectations of potential reform to the way that ASEAN conducts itself, and you also made the point about, and Pa Cornelius also made the point about the change of status of the ASEAN Secretariat to the ASEAN headquarters. So I was just wondering, to what extent will that agenda to quote-unquote reform ASEAN or make progress to the way that ASEAN change its ways of conduct is still ongoing? Because there were several clauses in the ASEAN Concord 4 that mentions about enhancing ASEAN's decision-making process, for example, under the remit of the ASEAN Summit. So I was wondering if there will be potential improvement or progress in that direction after Indonesia's chairmanship, and whether or not there is still an interest, whether or not there is still a vigor within Indonesia to push that agenda. And also to Mr. Douangchak, is there any sort of interest from Laos to sort of continue to push to promote ASEAN to also improve itself in terms of its institutional ways of conduct? And maybe lastly, to Mr. Cornelius Purba, I was also wondering if you have any other sort of evaluation or comments on Mr. Ambassador Douangchak's remark, especially in terms of whether, how would you assess, or what sort of challenges do you think will Laos have to take into account for its chairmanship next year? Thank you.
Thank you, Magda, for such a comprehensive question. And I will move on to the next participant, yeah? Oh, yes. Laila again?
Yes.
Please.
I'm sorry for asking another question.
No, it's okay.
So alphabetically, Myanmar should have been the chairmanship, right? But is the continuous conflict of Myanmar the reason why Myanmar is not allowed for the chairmanship of ASEAN? And even if they are allowed, what do you think are the risks? My question can be answered by all the speakers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And yeah, so the question were actually referred to all the speakers. If I'm not mistaken, the first question was about China's map. So as a regional organization, was there any discussion in ASEAN regarding this new map from China? So I would like to start maybe from Ambassador Derry Aman.
So usually when a panelist try to respond to questions, we try to find the easiest one first, right? But from the all three questions, there were no easy ones. So I will have to try to respond as relevant as possible. And let me start with, it doesn't mean that this is the easiest, once again. Reform in ASEAN, right? So we, at least during Indonesia's chairmanship this year, we didn't use the word reform. We used the word transformation, progress, change, because reform reform would provide a notion that what we have right now is not good, and we have to change it, reform it as such to make it good. So we did not want to have that kind of notion. But of course, Indonesia's chairmanship, one of the agenda is to strengthen the effectiveness of ASEAN and as well as the ASEAN Secretariat, to strengthen the effectiveness. While Pa Cornelius has mentioned the need for the ASEAN Charter to be revised, amended, some may have that view, But in ASEAN, there is no consensus that there is a need for the ASEAN Charter to be reviewed and, of course, amended. A review mechanism of the ASEAN Charter is there. There is a 5-yearly review, but it does not necessarily mean or lead towards revision or amendments. Okay. So Indonesia took the agenda of strengthening the effectiveness. That is why we came up with the idea of making ASEAN matters and more resilient to challenges. That's one of the conclusions that I've mentioned. And the focus of our so-called strengthening the effectiveness is on the procedures of decision making, especially in the summit. So we came up, or we agreed in ASEAN with the rules of procedures to support decision making process at the ASEAN Summit. So we made it even clearer, stronger, firmer, and for everyone to understand what kind of decision-making process that is available as an option in the ASEAN Summit. So that is a change. That is the transformation that we managed to have, so that we are hoping with any development, any challenges that we face in the ASEAN Summit, decision-making is still there. It will not hamper, it will not constrain the ASEAN Summit to make decisions. So we succeeded in having that to be strengthened. So that is the limited, if I may say, or the partial part of the reform that ASEAN is going through. The process of making ASEAN even better is, of course, a sustainable agenda. Whoever the chair will always try to make agenda even better each day, more beneficial for its people, for the ASEAN community. And by having the word or the term ASEAN headquarters, it represents the strengthening of the ASEAN Secretariat. So the ASEAN headquarters may be understood as more to the location, which that part of, kalau orang Jakarta taunya CSW ya, the location is CSW, CSW, near Block M. So that area is ASEAN headquarters. The people working in that ASEAN headquarters is still the ASEAN Secretariat. So SecGen, until the lowest staff, is still regarded as the ASEAN Secretariat. But the location is ASEAN headquarters, which in Indonesian would mean Markas Besar, Mabes, headquarters. Different if you look at Secretariat ASEAN compared with Markas Besar ASEAN. So the stature is different. So that is also one example of the so-called reform that Indonesia, through its ASEAN Chairmanship, has undertaken. So again, reform, change, progress, transformation in ASEAN will continue to be undertaken with the sole agenda to make ASEAN better. And it does not necessarily be attached to a certain chair. Now on the Myanmar Chairmanship. Alphabetical order after Indonesia, Laos, and then Malaysia 2025, 2026 should be Myanmar. Okay. After Myanmar should be the Philippines. So this was discussed during the ASEAN meetings, whether it's at the senior official level at the ministerial level, at the summit. So everyone should understand that decisions in the summit will always start from the very lowest level. It could start from us at the CPR, goes to the SOM, senior officials, to the ministers, and then the ministers will recommend to the summit for the summit adoption. So in the end, the highest decision making is of course the summit. But the process of that kind of decision is being made from the lower level, these kind of processes. So that's why I said that it was discussed in the ASEAN meetings. And in the end, it was agreed that in 2026, the chair will be the Philippines. It has been decided. It has been decided through the consensus and the discussion with Myanmar, where they offered, if I may say, offered the position that they are not going to be ready to be chair in 2026. So therefore, ASEAN 10 decided that with the consent, with the consent and the offer from the Philippines, that the Philippines will be the chair in 2026. So that was the process. So it's not the notion of, okay, Myanmar, you're not allowed to be the chair in 2026. It wasn't like that. It wasn't like that at all. So everything was discussed openly, and it was agreed in a consensus manner that the Philippines offered. If I may say, okay, if Myanmar is not ready yet to be chair in 2026, then the Philippines would gladly take 2026 as the year of the Philippines chairmanship. So that was how it came about, how it evolved to this kind of decision. So there was no saying, okay, we don't want Myanmar in 2026. There wasn't anything like that. So it's not that Myanmar not allowed. We openly suggested and asked to our colleagues from Myanmar, how would Myanmar be in 2026? Are you going to be in a position to be taking up as the chair of ASEAN? And we discussed further. So the best and consensus way that we agreed was that in 2026, it will be the Philippines who will be the chair. And we'll see on the developments, of course, in the future on how Myanmar's future will develop. The last on South China Sea, on the map. We were not in the summit, right? No. So we don't know. Well, of course, in summits, especially in the EAS, in the East Asia Summit, it's a leaders-led forum, okay? Leaders-led forum entails that any leaders from the EAS can raise any issue, what they want to be discussed. They can raise the issue not to be discussed, it's also the case. They just raise a concern, no one responded, it's okay. But the important thing is that the EAS is a forum where it's a leaders-led forum, where leaders can decide what kind of issue they want to raise. So concerns were raised and not necessarily to be discussed. All right? So I cannot say more than that because I'm not responsible in handling those issues. I don't want to be in a position that I misstated something. But again, the EAS is a forum for leaders. They can raise any issues of their concern. They can talk about A, they can talk about C, they can say, I don't like D. It's open. And of course, with regard to the map that has been introduced by China lately, it raised a lot of concerns to a number of countries, of course. But I cannot say more what was discussed and how the result was. We can see, I believe our colleagues from the Habibie Center has looked into the chair's statement of the EAS, whether there is something mentioning about the map, or is it a general chair's statement with regard to the South China Sea. But the most important thing is that ASEAN is always in the position to be promoting peace and stability anywhere, especially in the South China Sea. So that is why ASEAN always try to take the lead in engaging, in discussing with China, of course, and other interested countries on how we can keep this important strategic region of South China Sea as a sea of peace, stability, and secure. So I believe I've said too much, and now I give the floor to Ambassador Bo.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Derry. And we move on to Ambassador Bovonethat.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. May I add a little bit? In fact, I totally agreed with Mr. Chair, Ambassador Derry. He mentioned is agreed of our ASEAN in ASEAN. That's why I don't want to repeat more, particularly on about the Myanmar Chairmanship. He informed you is the agreement of our ASEAN. I totally agree with him. For the reform, that you asked some question from our researcher, we don't use about reform. I agree with Ambassador Derry too. We try to strengthen the effectiveness of the ASEAN Secretariat, of the Secretary General, of the anything including the, we did not talk about the revise of ASEAN Charter, but we review the implementation of the ASEAN Charter on some articles only, not revise on the ASEAN Charter. That's what I would like to say. For the Laos Chairmanship, as I informed earlier and reiterate that Laos will follow up the good momentum and achievement of the Indonesia Chairmanship, as well as ASEAN, other previous ASEAN chair over the past year. So anything that we do it in this year, and then we will continue to follow up in next year, inconsistent with the Laos team, enhancing connectivity and resilience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. And we move on to Mr. Kornelius Purba. So the question regarding the Laos Chairmanship, is there any assessment, or what do you see the challenges and opportunity for Laos Chairmanship next year? Thank you.
If you ask me about Laos Chairmanship, I must be polite, will be successful, even more successful than Indonesia. I cannot say more than it. Otherwise, we'll upset the ambassador. About ASEAN reform, it's just like talking about UN reform. You talk about it the whole year. Security Council must be reformed. Make your articles on that, make your writings on that, but there will be no reform. About South China Sea. South China Sea, nearly more than 90% of South China Sea is claimed by China. Although the UN tribunal refused China's claim, the time the plaintiff is the Philippines. Actually, in 1990s, China still sticks to the 1982 UN Convention Law of the Sea. At the time, Pak Muhtar Kussumadbaja was the foreign minister. But now they don't care. And this recently, not just nine days life.
So much for all speakers for the comments and the response to our question. I'm afraid that we only have 4 more minutes. And before I close the discussion, I would like to give every speaker to give like closing remark. And you only have 1 minute, so make it short, please. And then I'll start from Mr. Kornelius, the closing remark.
1 minute. Subscribe the Jakarta Post. paper or digital, because my salary totally depends on it. Make sure I will also write my weekly column. Maybe not very useful for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then Ambassador Bovonethat.
Okay, thank you, moderator, for your excellent moderator. I also like to thank once more time to the Habibie Center for the invitation. What I would like to say for the final word, I would like to say that Laos PDR will try our best to serve the ASEAN Chairmanship next year. We stand ready to work closely with our ASEAN member state, with our dialogue partner, with our other external partner to fulfill the Laos ASEAN Chairmanship, as well as for the successful from the Indonesia Chairmanship, as well as the previous ASEAN Chairmanship. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. And the last but not least, Mr. Derry Aman.
Thank you very much, Ibu Herawati. I wish I could say something like Pak Kornelius, but I can't. Well, my closing remarks probably is to again reiterate Indonesia's full support to our next incoming chair, Laos PDR, and please, everyone should also see that agendas in certain chairmanship will be followed up in the year to come by the next chair. So therefore, Indonesia next year, not being a chair, we will of course support the chairmanship of Laos PDR. But of course, Indonesia have also the continued obligation to make sure that our agendas in 2023 will be followed up and will sustain in 2024 and to the following years. So Indonesia is fully committed, although not as a chair. We are fully committed to support the ASEAN chair next year, Laos PDR, because it will represent the success of ASEAN. And also that what we achieve in 2023, we will make sure that 2024, there will be follow-ups and hopefully benefits that we can get from the achievement in 2023. So thank you very much once again, Habibie Center, for the invitation and looking forward for the next opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all speakers, for all the insightful presentation for today. So if I may conclude, it's a lot to conclude, but if I may say, despite various geopolitical and geoeconomic challenges at the global and regional level, Indonesia did manage to fulfill several key deliverables, and I think we have to appreciate it. And for the next year, chairmanship, Laos will uphold the theme of enhancing connectivity and resilience. And as Ambassador Derry said, Indonesia will give full support to Laos Chairmanship for next year. So again, thank you so much for all participants in this room. And once again, I'd like to thank our speakers, Ambassador Derry Aman, thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. And then Ambassador Bovonethat, thank you so much for participating in our discussion. And also Mr. Kornelius Purba. And yeah, we already subscribed Jakarta Post, so don't worry about that. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing valuable insight on this issue. And it is an honor to have you here. And again, please give a round of applause to our speakers. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I officially end the discussion. Thank you so much, everyone, and see you in a Habibie Center event. Maybe in 2 weeks, we're gonna have another discussion. So thank you. Yeah.